Recently, we've been learning a lot about different types of reliability and validity of measuring tools in quantitative studies. Prior to that, we had learned about different types of validity, internal validity and external validity for quantitative research. In this video, we're switching gears a bit. We're going to be talking about how these issues relate to qualitative research. The two main criteria that we use to talk about reliability and validity in qualitative research are authenticity and trustworthiness, and these come from some of the references that you see on the screen. So if you're planning to do a qualitative study, make sure that you hang on to these references because you may want to use some of them when you write your method section of your independent study or your thesis. And I'm going to start with authenticity, but for the most part, I'm going to be focusing in this video on trustworthiness. But I did want you to know, or be at least familiar with, a couple different types of authenticity. So ontological authenticity is all about how much the research enhances or informs the perspectives of the subjects who are participating in the study. Educative authenticity is somewhat similar, but it's all about how the research helps people to understand and appreciate other people's viewpoints. So not necessarily the people who are participating in the research, but other people who are consuming the research, hearing about the research later on, or reading the articles that come from the research, etc. Catalytic authenticity is all about how much the research brings about social change, and tactical authenticity sounds a little bit similar. It's all about how much the research empowers people to act. And finally, fairness is how much the research considers multiple viewpoints. So I know some of these definitions sound similar to one another. I don't expect you to actually memorize these different types, but I just generally want you to be familiar with what authenticity is and the idea that in qualitative research, we want to be promoting different viewpoints, different perspectives. We want people to learn about other people's perspectives. We want people to be empowered to act and to bring about social change in qualitative research. Trustworthiness consists of credibility, transferability, dependability, and confirmability. So I'll talk about each of these one at a time, and then in the next several slides, I'll talk about different researcher strategies that can be used to promote these different types of trustworthiness. So credibility is all about whether the findings have merit. Are they true? Are they accurate? Are they valid? So you can think about credibility as being somewhat like validity, and in particular like internal validity. Transferability is asking, are the findings applicable to other contexts? So when we talked about external validity, we talked about how we want our quantitative findings to be generalizable to other people or other settings or other time periods. So you can kind of think about transferability in qualitative research being analogous to external validity in quantitative research. Just like I was saying about credibility, you can think about credibility in qualitative research being analogous to internal validity in quantitative studies. Dependability is all about the consistency of the findings. Can they be replicated? So you can kind of think about this as being like reliability in quantitative research. And confirmability asks, are the findings shaped by the respondents, or by the participants, and not by researcher bias, motivation, or interest? So basically, is the researcher neutral, impartial? Are they not imposing their own biases or their own perspectives too much on the findings? Are they basically, are they basing the findings on what the participants actually said or did in the study? So on the next several slides, I'm going to talk about researcher strategies for establishing credibility, transferability, dependability, and confirmability. So there are many researcher strategies for credibility. One of those is prolonged engagement, basically spending ample time in the field, ample time taking observations, taking interviews, etc. Persistent observation means taking observations that focus on the relevant details for the topic that's being studied. Triangulation basically means corroborating findings through different sources of information, so maybe from different participants, different methods, so different methods of data collection. Like you could do not only interviews, but also written observations, or have participants write in journals. So you have different sources of data as well, different methods of collecting data. And you could also triangulate through different investigators, basically different researchers kind of looking at the same data and agreeing on what the findings are. So there's a number of different ways you can do triangulation, but it basically just means, having basically ways of agreeing on what the findings should be. Peer debriefing is a way of reflecting on one's own assumptions or biases by talking to a disinterested peer. And by that I mean just someone who's not directly involved in the research. So basically this is where the researcher talks to someone and identifies whether they have certain assumptions or biases that may be influencing how they are interpreting or analyzing the data. Negative case analysis is a strategy where you would actually look for other evidence that contradicts the findings. Referential adequacy is an approach where you would analyze maybe like half of your data, but set the other half of the data aside to look at later. Like once you've basically interpreted your first set of data and come up with findings, then if you look at the second set of data, does that basically validate the findings that you came up with initially? Member checking is a strategy in which you would ask your participants for their view on whether the findings are valid, whether they reflect what they were thinking when they were interviewed or whatever. You can also use member checking just to kind of check the accuracy of, for example, the interview transcripts. Like just have them read over the transcript. Is this what you said? Am I interpreting what you said correctly? And things like that. So basically just checking back in with the participants and getting their feedback on the validity of the findings. Researcher strategies for transferability. So remember, this is all about basically applying the findings elsewhere. So basically a thick description is when you describe the phenomenon in great detail. So in your report, in your write-up, you use a thick description. In other words, you provide lots of examples, just lots of information so that the reader can assess the extent to which it's applicable in their own kind of world, their own setting. So this can involve, as I said, providing examples like actual quotes from participants that are representative of the different findings, the different themes that have emerged in the research. Researcher strategies for dependability. So an external audit is one strategy. This is where you basically would have another researcher who wasn't involved in the study to examine and basically audit your methods, data, and findings. So basically just kind of going through and checking everything and seeing if they agree or if anything jumps out at them as being, not valid or something like that. So that's an external audit. And strategies for confirmability. So again, triangulation is one thing that you can do. This I've already talked about in a previous slide. An audit trail is kind of like an external audit, but you're not specifically having someone audit your work. You're basically just providing so much detail about the research process, about the data, about the methods of data reduction, analysis, reconstruction, and synthesis. So, in other words, how you identified themes in the analysis, and other methodological notes, procedures, interview questions. Basically, you're just giving the reader so much information about how you conducted the study that they can basically audit your process and determine whether they think that you went about it in a fair and impartial way. So remember that confirmability is all about whether the research was done in an unbiased and impartial way as much as possible. And reflexivity is another strategy. This is where the researcher frequently reflects on their own perspective, position, assumptions, biases, etc. A reflexivity journal is one way that this is done. So basically, just kind of journaling throughout the research process to reflect on those biases. A reflexivity statement is another thing where you basically just kind of write a statement about what your perspectives are and what different things might influence your viewpoints on the topic. And that's it for types of authenticity and trustworthiness in qualitative research and researcher strategies for establishing the different forms of trustworthiness in qualitative research.